we have our second international guest keynote speaker from Malaysia, Monash University of Malaysia, Professor Niaz Asadullah. Welcome, sir.
Hello, assalamualaikum everyone. I just want to do a quick technical check. Are you able to see my slides moving, or
Yes.
is it stuck?
It's not moving right now.
Right. Okay. I suspected so. So just give me a moment. So maybe what I will do is I'll just upload it from a different computer. Just give me a moment, right? So
Okay, no problem.
Right. Okay. So.
Hocamız slaytların hareket etmediğinden bahsetti. Şimdi farklı bir bilgisayardan tekrar bağlanacağım dedi. Kusura bakmayın dedi. İkinci önemli konuşmacımız Malezya Monash Üniversitesi'nden Profesör Niaz Asadullah. Kendisinin sunum başlığı Global Food Security and Sustainable Agriculture, küresel gıda güvenliği ve sürdürülebilir tarım. Hello.
Yes, I think I've managed to solve it. So is it? So you can see it now. Is it moving?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. Okay. So I think I can sort of start my lecture. I don't know whether you can see my video. Are you able to see my video?
We can both see your video and the presentation. There's
Excellent.
not a problem.
Okay.
Professor,
Excellent.
yes.
So thank you again for inviting me to deliver the keynote lecture on such an important topic, global food security and sustainable agriculture. As we speak, we have so much to celebrate in terms of progress in human security and economic prosperity. But increasingly, as you're all aware, we have become very concerned about limits of economic progress, which we have seen often has come at the expense of social development and ecological degradation. While we are producing and consuming more food compared to what we have done a century ago, the increase in economic activities have... Sorry, is there a problem? Hello? Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Is there a problem?
We can hear you. There's not a problem. We can hear you.
Okay. So thank you. So again, just to continue, while we are producing and consuming more compared to what we did in the past, we have put a great strain on the environment. So in today's lecture, I'll comment on this challenge with an exclusive focus on agriculture, its sustainability from environmental and social perspectives. And I would also clarify in my lecture, what does all this mean for the Sustainable Development Goals agenda of ensuring food security for all by 2030. So let me start with a clarifying note. Why have I chosen to talk about agriculture? Well, it's because the whole world is, once again going through a crisis when it comes to access to food. At the start of the pandemic in 2020, the FAO warned of a global protein crisis. But even after 2 years of the pandemic, prices of wheat, eggs, chicken, and cooking oil all are on the rise, and pretty much everywhere, in high income as well as in low income countries. Initially, our concern was about the pandemic, when we were worried about global shortage of food grains and other protein. But just when we were supposed to recover from the pandemic and restore global food supply of grains and food crops, the war in Ukraine has worsened food inflation by once again disrupting global supplies. And that is what you can see on the left-hand side graph, where the red line is sloped upward. It is rising very sharply, and that is what is capturing the trends in recent food price inflation. And at the bottom of the red line, you can also see trends in food prices in the past, in the year 2021, as well as in years before the pandemic. So that is the larger motivation for today's talk, which I want you to keep in mind, but that is not all. Sadly, this rising inflationary trend has created a vicious cycle where governments around the world, worried of national food security, have adopted protectionist measures, just like what we have seen after the 2008 financial crisis, which led to a food price crisis. Food protectionism is on the rise within the developing world. And that in turn has added to the ongoing food inflation. So we have seen this in all kinds of countries. In Indonesia, it is the export ban on cooking oil. In India, it is the ban on wheat export. In Malaysia, most famously, you might have heard of ban on chicken export to neighboring Singapore. And even in another country, Bangladesh, which is not really a food exporter, it has also imposed a ban on exotic rice export. So what is the significance of this? Take, for instance, India. Even though it's not a major wheat exporter, the ban actually unsettled the global markets, leading to a 6% rise in global wheat price. Now, all these are, again, indicative of the growing political anxiety. All governments are deeply worried, and they all want a resilient food and agriculture sector. And the reason why there is this political anxiety is because agricultural protectionism, in part, is also a response, political response to food riots. Citizen violence have been noticed in different parts of the world where they felt that their food rights were violated. So therefore, in this lecture, I'll argue that the impact of the war in Ukraine on food price, as well as the political crisis as we witness relating to food riots, are rather just the symptoms. The real problem is elsewhere, and that is, related to the rapid expansion in agriculture production at the world level. Perhaps, the way we are producing food has become unsustainable, and perhaps that is what has been exposed by the pandemic, and that is what I would refer as the root cause. So therefore, the root cause, in my view, is related to the changing nature of supply and demand for food, the mismatch between agricultural production and food use. There are other causes, of course, that relate to production practice that have become increasingly unfriendly to nature, excessive use of pesticides and fertilizer. So again, for the debate on agricultural sustainability and global food security, how we produce food is just as important as how much waste do we make in food consumption. And that will be really the main message of my lecture today. So on that note, let me now share the outline of the talk. First, I'll start with a quick overview of the global picture, clarifying how we as a world community has achieved progress in food sufficiency alongside economic prosperity, but at the same time, how we have also are still concerned about food insecurity. And next, I will comment on 3 or 4 challenges that we have before us for ensuring global food security. And there I will talk about how to make then sustainable agriculture a reality, and what is the, what should we make of the movement towards environmental, social, and ESG movement, governance, whether it's a silver bullet for delivering green agriculture. And is really green farming the answer, or is it about green consumption? Or perhaps the answer lies beyond all of these, beyond green financing, green farming, and green consumption. And in that context, I'll be provocative and ask whether women, the agent of gender inequality, has anything to do with the future of sustainable agricultural production. So that is really the broad outline of my talk. So let me now get started with the main lecture. So as promised, I'll start with the big picture, just quickly reminding you that we have so much to celebrate, the progress we have made in the past. And what you see here is a collection of graphs. The first one is based on this enormous progress we have seen in increasing our life expectancy. Compared to 100 years ago, as a whole, we are living lives that are much longer. And this is a journey that has continued. And at the same time, we are healthier compared to before. A smaller proportion of the world population is undernourished and underweight. Now, there is a big food connection with these three trends. And that is what you can see from the bottom graph, that at the same time, coinciding these big global improvements in indicators of well-being is this steady rise in food supply. So in terms of per capita food supply, this confirms the importance of food security for advancing human well-being. But the big question is this, that have we made certain choices which, while have led to this progress, has caused new challenges? So that is where I want to turn to now. How did we achieve this progress? Well, this is the familiar answer. It has been achieved through modernization and mechanization of agriculture, which helped us scale up production, given our limited resources, limited supply of land. And that is what you see from these graphs, because there are four graphs. What we see is that increased output and food production was achieved despite falling employment in agriculture, meaning that increasingly fewer people are relying on agriculture for livelihood. At the same time, global land supply has stagnated since 2000. And what has changed, therefore, is the intensity with which we have been cultivating land. And that has been achieved through greater use of machines and tractors. But it is not just machines and mechanizations. We have also seen increasing use of fertilizer and pesticides. So today, food production is so much more resource intensive, and it has caused, unfortunately, its own unique sustainability challenges. The first is that agriculture has paradoxically become a major contributor to climate change. The sector globally emits about 3/4 of nitrous oxide, which is what you would recognize as the laughing gas. Unfortunately, this is no laughing matter because it comprises roughly 6% of the entire greenhouse gas emissions. And the second challenge is that the gains from progress in global food production has become increasingly uneven. And this partly explains the reversal of a historical trend. After decades of improvement in food production at the national level, many poor countries today have become self-sufficient in food production. And at the same time, we have seen a rise in food trade, particularly following the global financial crisis of 2008 and the global food crisis of 2010 and 12. And we have also seen a sudden rise in food insecurity at the global level, particularly since 2015, a trend that only got worsened by COVID-19. So therefore, the left-hand side two graphs shows that there is this rise in trade of food since 2015. And on the right-hand side, you can see exactly during the same time, we have seen this increase in food insecurity at the world level. So to give you a very precise figure, today, 9% of the world population are severely food insecure. And globally, 1.9 billion are moderately or severely food insecure. So we are far from meeting the UN global target of ending hunger by 2030. And we have the added challenge of dealing with sustainability challenge in agriculture to ensure that we don't damage planetary health while we try to secure food for billions on Earth. To make things worse, there is also another side of the global food crisis, which is not limited to sustainable agriculture. It is related to human behavior and has paradoxically also led to undermine the movement towards sustainable agriculture. Something I'll comment on later, but at this point, let me just sum up the big challenges for global food security. So the number one is that hunger still persists. Despite progress, close to 1 billion people are suffering from chronic hunger, not having enough food to eat regularly for active life. The second challenge is that further scaling of food production means rapid growth in agriculture, which in its current form threatens our planetary health through global warming. The third challenge is that there is concern over how we produce food and what we produce. Most of the greenhouse emission in agriculture originates from protein production, animal protein in particular. So scaling up production has seen marginalization of smallholders and the rise of for-profit large agro multinational corporations, and this has also undermined competition in food market. So concern of unfair distribution is also on the rise. And the fourth challenge is not related to unsustainable supply, but it has got to do with wasteful food production, food consumption. So therefore, what I want to do is just elaborate on this point before I go into the solution. So according to the UN agency, we as a whole world community waste almost 1 billion ton of food every year. So while we are worrying about food insecurity, this is enormous waste of resources. And most of the wastage occurs in countries which are income rich, but a significant part also happens in countries which are not very high income, such as India and China. So clearly we need more equity and redistributive justice on one hand, and at the same time, we need more efficiency and resiliency in the food production system. All these can be summed up together in one term, which is green agriculture. So we need green agriculture to deliver food security at the world level by 2030 to ensure that agriculture is sustainable. So the question is that how do we deliver green agriculture by 2030? How can we ensure sustainable agriculture? Is the current ESG movement silver bullet? So at this point, therefore, this is a global challenge before us. But what I will do in the remaining part of my lecture is to focus on 3 conventional pillars of agricultural sustainability. First, green farming practices. Second, green finance for agriculture. And third, green consumption. And then, of course, there is a fourth element, which I will turn to. I have just listed it on the slide, which has got to do with the role of women, which I'll come to at the end of my lecture. So to start with green farming, one of the popular enabler of green farming is widespread adoption of artificial intelligence. Technologies such as drones, satellite data, precision farming. All these are expected to reduce input waste and reduce the resource dependence we have currently in food production. And in doing so, they are supposed to reduce environmental harm caused by our current environmental practices. The second enabler for green farming is related to governance, regulation, issuance of organic certification, geographic identification, which together would create incentive for farmers to adopt organic, environmentally friendly policies and practices. But even then, we face a political challenge in promoting green farming practices. And that relates to the power imbalance between smallholders and large corporations. Small farmers are widely seen as key to restoring traditional farming practices by reversing years of harm caused in the name of mechanization of agriculture and green revolution, I should add. On the other hand, large farmers and corporations have a comparative advantage in delivering scale in agriculture production. The smallholders also have challenges related to uptake of green technology because of their illiteracy and low income. There is a concern, therefore, of greenwashing by agricultural corporation in the name of green farming. Now, at this point, let me share a case study on scaling up green agriculture from Malaysia so that you can relate to the concern over greenwashing. So this relates to a community which is for centuries dedicated to production of a very high value added, economically speaking, organic variety of rice. In Malaysia, it's popularly known as Barrio rice because it originates from a location called Barrio, and which is in highlands of East Malaysia. This is a community I visited earlier this year, and where indigenous people, Kelabit tribe, have grown this exotic variety and have protected the seed and biodiversity through their culture and tradition and through their livelihoods for centuries. And again, as I said, the community is in the highland, 3,500 feet above the sea level. And unfortunately, that means they're landlocked by mountain chains. Road transport to local seaport takes up to 8 hours. And which means that marketization of this variety of rice is a big challenge. And the other challenge is the structural transformation related challenge of depopulation, that younger generation migrating to cities, leaving farming to elder aging population. So what the state government of the state of Sarawak in East Malaysia did was to engage a private agro company called Sharia. And the company was established in 2009. And the idea was that the company would take land on lease from local farmers in Barrio to scale up the rice production. Unfortunately, this was mostly top down without adequate community consultation. The reason why Sharia got the contract is because absentee landlords who are migrants to the city and have become part of the urban elites have lobbied with the government for the Sharia to win the contract. So at the start of the contract, Sharia promised environmentally compliant production of organic rice, integrating modern technology with traditional knowledge. But in practice, none of this happened. Buffaloes were replaced by tractors in the name of mechanization. But not just that, machines were chosen without community consultation, without local knowledge. So therefore, they were not compatible with the soil type. And there were also oversights very little oversights in terms of sharing the final produce of the rice with the local landowners, which then led to a loss of trust. And then the contractor then became worried about fulfilling contractual obligation and ended up using pesticides and fertilizer. So while the rice was produced in Barrio, and it was supported by geographic identification to authenticate that this is Barrio rice, it was anything but organic. So in the end, efforts to scale up production of this organic rice was not sustained after 10 years of experimentation. So therefore, this case study, I hope, is a reality check for members in the audience today. That, our campaign for green farming is one thing, but how we translate that in reality, how we get the governance right, how we engage the local communities, how we make sure that smallholders are not marginalized by large corporation is actually a big practical stumbling block. Now, on that note, let me now turn to a related pillar of green agriculture, which is green financing. So one way to encourage uptake of green farming practices is by reforming agriculture finance. But this requires a clean energy standard and universal green skills among smallholder farmers as well as large corporations. And these are demanding requirements. If you think about it, for developing countries where there is still mass literacy, agriculture is about informality, and there are many forms of inequality. And agriculture sector in many parts of the developing world is undergoing a demographic change, something I'll comment on later in my lecture. So one of the challenges, therefore, in this context is the inherent financial bias against smallholders and the inbuilt favoritism towards large agricultural corporation. And this is where, the promise of green finance is questioned because as it stands, it stands to profit. It stands to support large corporations in adopting automation and mechanization compared to smallholders. The second related challenge is gendered financial exclusion. Women are increasingly becoming a key part of agriculture, and they are core to ensuring that we have green farming practices in place. But as I will explain later on, that, well, there are structural barriers that are keeping women marginalized. So therefore, while we are talking about green finance, the prospect of it in agriculture, as it stands, given the barriers, there is this risk of greenwashing in the name of green financing, particularly in countries where there is state capacity gap, that where the government does not have a green accounting mechanism. So if regulators and financial authorities do not have the capacity and skills to identify and audit violation of green practices, green financing will mean nothing more than tokenism and another avenue for large agricultural enterprises to monopolize food production. So therefore, again, in order to achieve sustainable finance for agriculture, we have to acknowledge the changing landscape of farming and the capacity constraint at the state level. Unless these gaps are addressed, we have serious concern over greenwashing. So let me now move to the third issue, which now is not about production, but it's about consumption. Another aspect of the current debate on global food security and sustainable agriculture is that global consumption itself needs to moderate to safeguard environmental concern. Without green consumption, changing farming practice alone will not address global food security challenge. And therefore, again, this is not an issue of farming. It is about eating less meat and creating the political environment to make this option accessible and preferable. And this remains our key strategy for climate change mitigation at the world level. But again, this is a problem on the demand side. There are many substitutes for red meat, poultry and eggs. Think of, the part of Asia where I'm from, we have a range of alternatives, red kidney beans, tofu, mackerel, pumpkin seeds, and chickpeas, which is also a popular option in Turkey. But spontaneous decline in animal protein consumption and switching to healthier alternatives is unlikely if we go by the current trends. So therefore, what this requires is behavioral change at the world level by creatively using nudges, effective public education and social messaging to encourage, switch to alternative protein consumption. So I've come to the end part of my lecture. So at this stage, I want to turn your attention to something else, going beyond green finance, green farming, and green consumption. I want to highlight the challenge of changing demographics in agricultural sector. In many parts of the world, farming community is aging, and rural areas have become depopulated in many parts because of large-scale migration of men to urban locations. And in these locations, women have actively or passively become the front line in food production in the agricultural sector. They're not just in charge of food processing at home, but they're also accounting for a very large share of the agricultural labor force. Therefore, be it green financing or green farming, we cannot sustain agriculture without women. And I say this because of emerging academic evidence showing how critical women are for the future of agriculture. Women are more likely than men, for instance, to start businesses that focus on sustainability. Women on company boards are also more likely to improve energy efficiency, reduce costs, and invest in renewable power generation. And yet, when you look at access to finance, it's a complete opposite of what it should be. The reality is that only 7% of investment in agricultural sector goes to women, even though women account for 40 to 50% of the agricultural workforce. So the future agenda on ensuring global food security must also insist on gender equality in the sustainable agricultural landscape. Particularly, I want to emphasize two dimensions. One is ensuring female leadership in running agricultural enterprises and in mobilizing farmers at the community level. And second is equitable finance for female farmers and agro entrepreneurs. So on that note, let me now conclude. I have started the lecture by summarizing the achievements we have, celebrated as a world community towards food security and how much improvement we have seen in living standards, which has happened in parallel alongside improvement in improved access to food. But at the same time, I've highlighted the rising concerns over food insecurity and the recent developments relating to food price inflation, which I've also pointed out has been ongoing since the 2008 financial crisis. These trends have, of course, worsened in recent years, and it is in this context that this morning I asked, what does our pursuit of food security mean for the future of agricultural sustainability, which is about producing food in a manner which is environmentally, socially, and economically responsible. I've argued that we have rather reached a tipping point. Recent disruption to global food supply caused by events such as war in Ukraine and the pandemic are at best proximate reasons for food inflation and insecurity. The deeper determinant is the fact that our demand for resources in production of food has reached perhaps unsustainable level in terms of the extent to which we use biofuel, animal and protein feed, chemical fertilizer, and pesticide. So therefore, our past progress in food supply occurred by ignoring environmental and social concerns. So the discussion on agricultural sustainability moving forward has to be about greening food production. I have commented on three aspects: greening finance for agriculture, greening farm practices, and greening food production. While I acknowledge the importance of all three, I've also stressed on the need to respond to a specific structural change in agriculture, which is the growing presence of women in food production and management. So therefore, for the future of sustainable agriculture, we must empower women in leadership position in agricultural governance, as well as at the community level, supporting female farmers. Without women's empowerment throughout the agricultural system, technology development and distribution, automation, and green financing alone will not deliver global food security by 2030. On that note, I would like to thank you again for your kind invitation. So I look forward to questions on my lecture. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. It was a great presentation about food.